Yes, as Maya said, we're thrilled to be here this evening with Shireen. It feels like we've waited for this moment for the last couple of weeks, so it's really great to be doing this. And it's been my pleasure over the last, throughout 2024 really, to be working with Shireen on her exhibition and residency with the Dunedin Public Art Gallery as part of our International Visiting Artist program. And so it's great to be able to sort of talk about the project tonight and let Shireen sort of provide some insight into the ideas and the works and the sort of thinking that shaped the residency experience and the exhibition. So I'm going to dive straight into my first question, which is, Shireen, through your multidisciplinary research-led practice, you create works and exhibitions that consider the histories and futurisms of collective space, materiality, and cultural practice. So I wondered if you could start by please unpacking some of the key concerns that shape your practice and work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lauren, and everyone for coming tonight. Before I answer Lauren's question, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people and pay my respects to the elders past, present, emerging, and also acknowledge that land here on so-called Australia was never ceded. And in answering your question, Lauren, some of the sensibilities that have reoccurred for a lot of my projects over the last 10 plus years have really been framed around the sense of the sacred and gathering. And I think that really comes to my notion of thinking about community and spaces that are really enriched by moments of sacred and ritual, like the mosque, and how that's really shaped my life and my sense of belonging and a sense of connecting with people. So I think that's really come strongly through my inquiry as an artist and what really interests me and sparks my curiosity to work in the studio. And that's come through in ways of thinking of language and looking at science and technology, but also sacred architecture directly and rituals and thinking across time. But that really does center around the material of copper, of course.
Yeah, that's a beautiful segue into my next question, because copper has been a consistent medium in your work, and you initially came to copper through the printmaking department while you were at art school, but you quickly started to explore copper, or the sculptural material of copper, didn't you, in your practice?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I found it such a transformative and alive material. I mean, it's millennia of development in growing it as a material and mineral, and then I had a really interest in like thinking about its cultural relevancy to like the Arab region and its connection to like the built civilizations that even like encompass the lands of Lebanon and beyond. But I think I was also so drawn to the material for its softness and how it enabled me to work with my hands. And that excited me as an artist from the beginning, that to develop a series of artworks or have a question in the material, I'd have to kind of further make and develop and construct my own tools and molds well before I could achieve developing a series of works in sheet copper. And I think that relationship of thinking heavily through process was really exciting, even as an art student. And I haven't really looked back. Like, I really enjoy that sense of empowerment that I can, with my two hands and conceptual thinking, develop my works in my studio and really enjoy and learn through the journey of the material, and how, yeah, also the concepts really overlay with each other through time and like through cultural practice and again through science. So it's been really wonderful learning and journey through the materiality of copper.
And you've touched on this slightly, but I think something that's important within your practice is that physicality, that engagement with copper as a material. So, you know, the hand piercing and the engraving and the sculpting, that's sort of been a relatively self-taught process, hasn't it? While you have worked with people that have expertise in the field, through art school and also in different sort of journeys around the planet and sort of experiences in different cultural contexts, but you are self-taught.
Yeah, I am. I'm predominantly self-taught. There's been years and years of experimentation and learning through research and trying to push the boundaries of the material and how I can kind of develop the works as I had hoped for, and then adjust and adapt and change and be flexible and be very humbled by the material. But it's been wonderful. I think I have such a compelling sense to delve into heritage practice within the metalsmithing field. And I think it's a real interesting gendered space that I like to open up. And I felt that empowerment really important, that I'm part of that active community who are working with the material, are very research-based in the material, but also have a really now strong understanding of the potential of the material copper. I mean, of course, it has a wealth of history in it. And I think bringing the heritage practice and pushing that into not just the contemporary space, but futurisms is really key to how even this project and exhibition has unfolded.
I think so. Your most recent work has very much looked at the influence of celestial navigation technologies of Arab astronomy on the future movement of people through migration and pilgrimage. So I wonder if you could talk about when that research thread first became a focus for you in your practice.
Well, initially I was interested in astronomy and celestial navigation as a query through the framing of migration. Solely because I am a child of migrants, and it's formed my worldview and my lived experiences as a first generation Australian, and with parents who were born and migrated to Australia from Lebanon. I was just really fascinated what technologies within celestial navigation has enabled humans to move across land and sea over time. And that early inquiry really led me through to understanding the formative foundations of astronomy and mathematics of the Arab sciences have contributed. But not just that, not just the incredible technology and development from those sciences of the Arab world, but that it wasn't just science, it was art and spirit and culture, and they were fully interlinked in dialogue, in forming each other, embodied in the instruments. That has really excited me as an artist to further query these connections and these overlaps, and to think of our contemporary world and how we move through the world today and how we will move through the world in the future and off Earth. And so it really came back to the instruments I was researching from the Arab and Islamic sciences in celestial navigation, and just extraordinary art that has been embodied into them and crafted into them, but also the strong faith and spiritual dimensions their functionalities are around, and the huge seismic cultural significance they contribute towards that still shape our world today. So it's really exciting that through this material handling and inquiry, working with collections directly and really revisiting collections and returning to those conversations with collection managers and curators and understanding the right questions to ask has really continually opened up a really generative way of thinking and new forms of seeing, literally. So it's been really wonderful that it's this direct connection to materiality again, but also this broader question of the sacred and science. Yeah.
I suppose in 2022 you received a residency at the Sydney Observatory, and that provided quite a direct context to unpack some of this research quite directly.
Yeah, no, it really was. That residency was my questions about migration early on. That Sydney Observatory residency was so wonderful and supportive that I could work directly with Andrew Jacobs, the curator at the Sydney Observatory and the Powerhouse Museum, and have like that really wonderful time as an artist in collections. And these collections are really predominantly focused on like English European scientific navigation devices. But I could see very early on there's a direct connection from the Enlightenment period and the Renaissance through to the Arab astronomy field and the Golden Age. So I was like, that really allowed me to actually see this like through line of history that's built on each other, and like the global connections that aren't quite pronounced in the world that we live in today, but they're so formative. Like you couldn't have had the Renaissance without Arab astronomy and the mathematics that came along with it. So yeah, that residency was extraordinary, and I hadn't anticipated where it could take my research and my practice. So it was great.
And that residency led to the exhibition Sacred Architecture in the Celestial Body that you had in 2023. And that exhibition included a series of prints and hand-pierced and engraved copper sculptures, didn't it?
Yeah, so the prints and the sculptures talk to each other quite directly. So the engraved copper plate prints were like my sculptural prints, very much thinking about atmosphere and installation. And the sculptures also spoke to sacred architecture, of course, and installation, and in this sense of sacred practice in space and off-earth experiences of the sacred. And that really had built on my speculative thinking around the Arab astronomy and Arab futurisms, and how this is a very active applied science today that's informing the space industry and space travel today and tomorrow. So it was just really interesting in those early days to just open up my thinking around what a mosque could look like in space, or what would a site of pilgrimage, what could that look like, or what infrastructure around that could look like. And so the forms that played in that sculptural series and those print series were actually directly informed by the instruments I was researching. So that's the quadrant, the sextant, and also the astrolabe. And you would notice there's a strong like decorative emphasis with the piercings, that was the removal of the copper in the forms, and also in like the prints, like the engraving reliefs. Then that's taken from like the beautiful artistic work within these instruments of the Arab astronomy. So that's kind of like the early inquiry moving through into like this historical research, but then strong speculative thinking at the same time. And there was a large 5-meter drawing that came out of the residency program at the observatory that I wanted to exhibit as context of like the material research I was engaging with. So that 5-meter drawing did map a lot of the collection and materials that I was handling, I was inquiring about and engaging with over that 3-month residency at the observatory. So it was a really nice context to bring like the sculptures and the prints into that conversation. And then, yeah, from 2023, which was only the start of last year, but it really had moved quite rapidly, having then worked in France and the UK with the Arab astronomy collections, and having had more in-depth conversations with curators and historians. But yeah, it's really great because then it had led into thinking about the notion of pilgrimage and futurisms around that.
And the concept and the act of pilgrimage has become a really important cornerstone to your recent work and sort of how it operates. Could you speak a little bit about why that act of pilgrimage has become such an important part of your current work?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, how I was really enamored at first how these instruments of celestial navigation I was engaging with in the Arab astronomy collections just had extraordinary premise of the sacred and acts of religious practice like pilgrimage, because when handling the instruments, like within the latitudes that were engaged in those instruments for the Northern Hemisphere, the latitude of Mecca, and the Kaaba, the holy site within Islam, which is the formative place of Hajj for pilgrimage, was really identified in each of those instruments that I was curious about. And I thought, wow, that's really fascinating. Like originally my first inquiry and question was about migration, and now here I am, continuously this recurrence of like this presence of pilgrimage. So it was really, that really had like shifted my thinking of speculating, or the notions of pilgrimage was really embedded within these instruments from the 8th century onwards. And here we are now in 2024, still relying on the same mathematics, the same sciences that are still like embedded in those instruments. So I was really fascinated what the notion of pilgrimage could look like in the future. And in my research, I've been looking into how space activity across non-Western faiths have had also like this query of the spiritual. And so there's previous Malaysian Muslim astronauts that have had to like inquire when they're in space, what direction do they pray in? We're like towards the Earth, but then they're in orbit and the spaceship's moving. So how, and then like you can't prostrate necessarily because of the gravity. So all these questions arise, and I was really fascinated. Well, then what could a pilgrimage look like if it's off Earth or if it's in the future? And that continues these same technologies that are enabling pilgrimage. So that kind of inquiry really came directly from handling the instruments and opened up this really beautiful speculation within the project that is on exhibition at Dunedin and has like also occurred across the Australian continent. Yeah.
So you mentioned the pilgrimage you went on across Australia. So that happened just prior to your arrival in New Zealand as part of the residency with the Dunedin Public Art Gallery. And it was important, I suppose, that you immediately saw the potential in the residency here to continue that methodology of working through these performative pilgrimages across land. And while you were on residency here, you started in Ōtepoti and then you moved northwest across the South Island, heading towards the coast. Could you talk a little bit about that act of pilgrimage? And I suppose what's coming through in the conversation we've had so far is the role that the instruments have played in guiding those movements. So what people will see in the show here is the astrolabe and the compass and the quadrant, and they were really important tools that guided this journey. So I suppose, could you speak a little bit about the actual practicalities and realities of that, using those instruments and how they informed how you traverse the landscape?
Yeah, definitely. So with my instruments, there also is this relationality with the engraved prints that are like my celestial mapping. And so I relied on the two to support my pilgrimage. But the intention I had to undertake pilgrimage is really carefully and slowly tracking the latitudes that align with Hajj. So this has what informed my route of pilgrimage, how I could cross country, and then also key navigational stars that supported my journeying. And what I really wanted to embody as a pilgrim, as a Hajjonaut, that I've termed in my project, is this person who has high-tech literacy, who is an innovator of technology, but also has like a strong sacred and ritual premise of undertaking this journey as a pilgrim. And that, I think, has been really incredible, that intention of being quite extraordinarily present, witnessing the night sky, and really engaging directly with the night sky, and engaging with the knowledges I've accumulated over the last few years and applying that to navigation. So it's been a really extraordinary sense to move through the world and move across land by building knowledge and applying knowledge directly in relationship to the night sky and the navigational stars. And what I have really been responsive to is that a lot of my research was the historical material of instruments and manuscripts and maps from Arab astronomy has been very much identified with the northern celestial sphere in the northern hemisphere. But because of my positionality here in the southern hemisphere as someone of migrant background, it's a really beautiful, like, cross-cultural relationship to identify very site-specifically with the instruments and my experiences on pilgrimage here with the southern celestial dome and really incredible, beautiful navigational stars that I've been connected to on pilgrimage across these latitudes. So through slowly moving from just after sunset, like half an hour after sunset, we have like the nautical twilight. So it's quite dark, but it's not pure darkness. So your navigational stars are very clear. And then about every 20 minutes to 30 minutes tracking from those navigational stars, the degrees of which those stars are either setting or rising from the east, heading west. And that support has been also correlated onto my maps, just as really important key notation and calculations as I move through with my devices as a Hajjanaut on pilgrimage. But yeah, that's in a nutshell.
When you were preparing to start your residency with us, it was quite an interesting contrast between the production stills you were sharing with us from your pilgrimage across Australia, which were these quite amazing, and I'm sure people have seen them, but there's incredibly beautiful sort of gold sandy deserts. And then your experience here, we had everything from like lovely sunny days to snowstorms to torrential rain and flooding. And I suppose, what was your experience? Because the video, the work in the show 5364 Nocturne takes the audience through these quite different in landscapes and environmental conditions. And I suppose, what was your experience of the landscape here as you were moving through it?
I was extraordinarily surprised. I think having undertaken quite a rigorous journey from the east coast on Gadigal country in Sydney up to Karijani country on the west coast of on the Indian Ocean, that was a quite extensive journey in relationship to South Island Aotearoa, but it was also the dry season, so it was like very, very unlikely I'd have different weather conditions and have been anticipated, like clear skies, no rain, and traversing a lot of really remote tracts of the continent. So that was really interesting because I hadn't, I guess, understood the quite significant difference of climate and latitude, the southern latitude being quite south, but also the altitude. Like, I was quite up high in a lot of parts of the island, and it was really extraordinary experience, but very much in a position of anticipation. Like, I really didn't know what was around the corner for the afternoon or for tomorrow or what we would wake up to, and it was really exciting. But again, like, being very present and adapting. And I think, yeah, there's like something said to maybe being someone who is constantly living between cultures. Like, I felt this visceral experience of being on South Island and like very much responsive to the weather experience and atmosphere and climate that showed that, like, the flexibility of the Hajjanaut and like even the costume, how it could adapt to the journey of pilgrimage across when the climate had severely changed from one day to the next. But it was such an extraordinary experience. And when the skies were clear and I could navigate with the stars, it was just phenomenal. And it was a very different season, like across the winters. And when I travelled across the Australian continent, it's just like you would have had in Aotearoa at the time in winter, very different stars. And then again, like in spring from September on pilgrimage, from Ōtepoti over to the west coast, like a beautiful different season of stars, to then re-engage my navigational skills and reconnect with the night sky at a different time of the year, at a different latitude. So it was really exciting that they had those two chapters of pilgrimage have a very strong distinction between them. So it's wonderful.
Mm. Mm. I think something really interesting about the exhibition, when you start thinking about it, is the fact that the works in the show, the series of navigational instruments, the group of work, the prints, works on paper, and then the film, together, they document the kind of core work through your residency, which was this pilgrimage journey. So they sit in this interesting space of documentation and documenting that experience. And so I think I'd like to ask a question about the film, but before I do, I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Spencer Reid, who was here on a residency with you and supported the development of the film and the soundscape. In the film, you're wearing this really incredible garment, and as you've spoken about, it sort of had multiple functions. It's amazingly sculptural, and very aesthetic, and it served you various functions, from being able to be adaptive to the conditions and like keep you warm and dry, but also as a shelter or a site of prayer. And you have these incredible moments in the film where it does look very much like a space in which you are occupying. And could you because I know when you designed the garment, you were very much considering traditional pilgrimage dress, but in combination with a spacesuit that an astronaut would wear. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, definitely. Thinking speculatively about this pilgrimage as a performance work too, I was really interested that the journeying was documented, but also the embodiment of pilgrim. And that, of course, is part of what is the garment of a pilgrim. And in Islam, undertaking Hajj is such an extraordinary moment in one's life, and it's one of the pillars of Islam. But with that, there is a significant garment, like this white linen garment. And I was really fascinated how it could cross over with this association of space activity and off-Earth experiences, like we are familiar with, like the astronauts' attire and uniforms. So I was like, oh, there's a really great space here to blur it, and also as a female and embodying that too. So I wanted to consider the aspects of the journeying as a pilgrim, as someone who's off Earth on pilgrimage, but also to think of the undertaking of ritual like prayer, and how the suit could adapt and support journeying across different terrains and climates and atmospheres. So that really informed even thinking of the material of the suit and the costume, and that had looked into some of the materiality that's used in space attire, and the uniforms, and what's used in outside of the spaceships, and when you're in the elements, and part of that materiality is Tyvek, and I was really fascinated how it's a really adaptable material that I could actually incorporate as a hajjanaut in my spacesuit, and the zip wear, and then how the suit unfolds as a form of sacred architecture during prayer, during rest also, and then that continues the journeying. So that those notions spoke back to, again, the speculation and sense of futurism, and this openness of, is this something from the future, or is this something of someone with a faith or spirituality that's traversing on pilgrimage? So yeah, it was really wonderful then to consider in the performative work of a pilgrimage what attire could support the research and the concept and journeying. Yeah, so that's been really great to employ that and use it as a great signifier to open up the speculation, because of course it's not a familiar suit that you would see someone wear on pilgrimage either. So.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question about the prints in the show? Because people in the film, there's a moment where you are drawing onto the prints in the film. So people sort of see the activity of that work being activated in the documentation. And I wondered, the interesting thing about the prints is that they have a sort of two-part production phase. So they were printed from copper engraved plates in your studio in Sydney, and then you physically took them on the pilgrimage with the navigational objects and annotated them across that journey. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit about the different information that they carry at those two phases of production.
Yeah, absolutely. So having done my research in thinking about the latitudes and the journeying across the South Island to the West Coast, I had to really consider what initial directions would I be following across land, and also which stars will be formative in responding to, initially at least. And that's the thing, like with the navigation work, I could pinpoint maybe 3 or 4 stars for sure that I'll be responding to, but there's so much learning along the journey that I enjoy that my mapping allows that to actually surface throughout the pilgrimage as a document and as a support of journeying in the calculative and annotations that are on there. But also like even like bringing the scored decorative motifs of the engravings into the prints, again reconnecting like this Arab astronomy and the spirit and the arts within the devices that are supporting my pilgrimage and navigation back onto the mapping. And so a lot of that has like been, I guess, resolved to an extent before the pilgrimage, but then again, like there's a lot of activity that has been undertaken during pilgrimage, which I love that the prints allow holding that space as a document and as a thing to work through. And it's not necessarily a fully resolved work before the pilgrimage. It's very much once having completed the pilgrimage, they have become a work in their own right. And no, it's really important. And the reason I wanted also to include the map making comes back to the materiality of copper, and that through my research and looking at earlier astronomical maps, they're all engraved copper plates that have shared and disseminated this form of knowledge for centuries. So I really wanted to bring that back into the project. And again, like to the devices and the arts embedded within those devices I've been researching, is that they employ also the engraved materiality of the copper and brass in the scoring, in the scale systems, in like the extraordinary intricate work that you'll find on those instruments. So it's like that relationality again that comes back to material, to the sciences, to the arts, that I find really important to have that synergy through the project within relationship to the research, and like this continuation of practice over time from historical to contemporary in the future. But yeah, like the maps are so integral to the pilgrimage and this navigation work.
Okay, I've got one more question before we open it up to any questions in the audience. But you know, this exhibition, and particularly through the film, you know, it offers this ambiguous, and it's intentionally ambiguous, and speculative fiction, but it's very much underpinned by these real world histories and cultural practice and sciences. And as you've spoken about this evening, you know, dating back to the 8th century. What do you hope that the exhibition sort of carries for audiences, or things that they might take away from it through what's sitting in that space?
Oh, okay. Well, I'd really hope that audiences can feel their own connection with the night sky through this project. I hope it really activates an excitement to reconnect with the night sky. I feel like, unfortunately, living in towns and cities, it's a part of our world we can't live through anymore, and there's like a really incredible power of observation that is like accumulative. You know, one can witness themselves. It's a really incredible form of empowerment to reconnect with the night sky, and we all have a really incredible cultural connection to the night sky, whether it be in the Western context, but also, of course, the non-Western context. And we have cultures, especially in Maori culture, that have really extraordinary connections to science and astronomy in that field. But I really hope that audiences feel that connection and that they also have their connection, and that's really important. And that, yeah, the night sky is just as important as how we move through the world in the daytime. They're both connected and inform how we live and how we understand the world today. And it's still very much a living science, but it's a living culture. And yeah, I hope that excites people to want to re-engage with the stars and the planets and find their connection to that. Yeah.
I think something that's been interesting through the show is it immediately raises this notion of alternative futurisms, surrounding space migration. It's quite direct in the panel for the exhibition. And perhaps my actually last question is, what does that notion of alternative futurisms for space migration mean to you?
Well, for me personally, it's really important to offer this strong counter-narrative of space futurisms that unfortunately space activity has like a really strong colonial impetus, and I find that quite concerning that it's that play of power and extraction and troubling form of ethics really could be further critically engaged with. So as an artist, I'm really driven to bring out works that can open the dialogue and also the cultural dialogue of astronomy and the future of space migration. And again, like with these site-specific navigational instruments, I'm reimagining a heritage practice and futuring histories to speculate possibilities for the past, the present, and future space migration. So this Hajjanot is really fundamental to like bringing out a form of possibility as like a female innovator, but also like opening it up to thinking who's contributed to our understanding of the world and of space and of the sciences in that field, but also where is that going and who can have access to that and who also can be part of the dialogue. So that's really fundamental to what's driven behind this art project in the sense of futurism.